Welcome to another 10 at 10. We are wrapping up with our last two teachings on Psalms 23, and we have had such a good time of just growing and learning on just taking phrases from this psalm and just learning truths from them. And the phrase that we're going to look at today, we talked about that it says, "You anoint my head with oil," in the last teaching. Today we're talking about "my cup overflows." And what a beautiful picture. The scripture that just comes to mind is found in Nehemiah, and it says, "The joy of the Lord is my strength." There's just something about when we live the believer's life, our cup overflows. That when we meditate on his goodness, when we walk this life out with him, when we have the understanding that he's always with us, that he's always listening for our voice, that he gives us the inside story, that he anoints our head with oil, that he prepares a table before us in the presence of our enemies. I just get a picture of just overflow, of just when we meditate on those things, our cup overflows. It's not just, you've heard the expression, a cup can be either half empty or half full. Well, the believer's life, it's neither. Our cup, it overflows with his goodness. And recently I was looking in the scriptures in the book of Philippians. And there's a scripture that I've been very familiar with, but as I was reading through the book a little while back, I recognized some truths that I had not seen before. And there's a scripture, it's found in Philippians 4:4, and it's a well-known scripture. You might have heard it before. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice." And I've known that scripture. I've, taught on that scripture that, Paul was reiterating, hey, this is super important. That's why he said it twice. But when I started in the book of Philippians and I read the book as a whole, in Philippians chapter 1, I read this phrase. Paul said that there were other people while he was in prison for the sake of the gospel. There was other people preaching the gospel, and some of them didn't have right motives. Some of them, it was to elevate themselves above Paul. But this was Paul's response. He said, "The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice." And then I'm going to go down. There may have been one other time that I'm not seeing, but then you go into chapter 2, and Paul is talking about, again, being in chains, and he's talking about the actual, the actual title to this section of scripture is "Do Everything Without Grumbling." And Paul in Philippians chapter 2, and this is in verse 17, says, "But even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me." Again, we're going over this joy thing. And then you go, I'm trying to remember if there's something in 3, but again, you go back to 4:4 where it says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice." And really in this scripture where it says, "My cup overflows," there's, when we choose to see things, choose to see life through the lens of the Lord, choose to see life that he always causes us to be victorious, and he's making a way for that victory. When we see things from the perspective of the throne, all through this, Paul is in hardship, Paul's in prison, he's being persecuted, he's in chains, And all throughout this book, he's reiterating, hey, this is the circumstance that normally I wouldn't be joyful about, but the joy of the Lord is bubbling up on the inside of me, and I rejoice. He's not saying I'm happy. He said, I rejoice. And somehow I know that Paul had this truth that is found in Nehemiah that says that the joy of the Lord is our strength. There's one other example that we find in the book of Acts where Paul and Silas, again, they're in chains for the sake of the gospel. And it says at midnight, they lifted up their voices and they sang praises to God. Man, there's something about lifting up your voice in the midst of wherever you are at and not giving thanks for maybe the dire circumstances you're in, but giving thanks to the God and Father of your faith that is giving you the victory, that is showing you the way out, and that is good, that he never changes, that he's faithful. And somehow just focusing in on him apart from your circumstances, that joy begins to bubble up. There's one other scripture that we're going to finish off with, and this is found in 1 Peter. And I'm turning to there right now. This is 1 Peter chapter 1. And again, it's talking about joy, but I love the way Peter words this. He talks about joy unspeakable and full of glory, something I can't even articulate in the midst of being pressed. And so in verse 8, he talks about, though you have not seen him, speaking of Christ, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. And so again, Peter's talking about there's a joy that I have when I serve the Lord, a joy that we can tap into. In Galatians, it talks about that we have the fruit of joy. So it's not the emotion of joy, but it's the fruit of joy. Joy is resident in there. Sometimes we just got to stir it up, most of the time by just lifting up our voices, sometimes by just saying ha, ha, ha in the midst of where we're at. And what happens is a life flow bubbles up, ministers to our heart, ministers to our body, just informs our mouth to put a smile on again, to just trust in the Lord who's always faithful. And so I just want to encourage you today, a picture of your life, a picture of the believer's life is the life of the overflow. Your cup overflows because you're a child of God. Have a wonderful day. We're going to wrap this up with one more teaching, and we love you, and so does God.